I stood at the front door that Mother's Day morning, my hands trembling as I clutched a bouquet of wildflowers I had spent hours picking from the vacant lot near the bus stop. The stems were bound together with a recycled ribbon I had carefully pressed the night before. My heart hammered against my ribs with a fragile, desperate hope that maybe this year would be different. Maybe this time Mom would see me. The living room smelled of her expensive perfume and the leather of our pristine white sofa. Tiffany sat there like a princess on her throne, scrolling through her phone with perfectly manicured nails that probably cost more than my entire month's allowance. She glanced up and I watched her lip curl into that familiar sneer that made my stomach clench. "What's that trash from the dump?" Her voice dripped with mockery as she turned her phone toward Mom. "Mother, she brought garbage home again." Mom didn't even look up from her morning talk show. Her voice was flat, bored. "Charlotte, can't you see I'm watching my program? You're always so inconsiderate." I swallowed hard, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. I picked them for you. Happy Mother's Day." My voice came out smaller than I intended, like a child's whisper in a cathedral. What happened next has replayed in my mind 1,000 times. Mom's hand shot out and yanked the bouquet from my grip so violently that the ribbon bit into my palm. She threw it onto our hardwood floor with such contempt that I actually flinched. "These weeds are only good for sweeping the floor." Then she stood and I watched in horror as her designer heels crushed each flower, grinding the yellow petals into a pulpy mess against the polished wood. Tiffany's laughter rang through the room as she raised her phone to record. "Oh my God, Mom, she looks like some ratty doll picking through trash. Our little weed girl." She posted it before I even had time to react, her fingers flying across the screen. Within minutes, I knew her thousands of followers would be laughing at me too. I dropped to my knees without thinking, my tears mixing with the crushed petals. The humiliation burned through my chest like acid mixing with a rage so deep and old that I barely recognized it anymore. It had been simmering for so long that it felt like part of my bones now. But that day was just the beginning of understanding how deep their cruelty ran. How carefully constructed their world was to keep me beneath their feet. How much worse it could get before I finally broke free. 3 days after that Mother's Day, I came home from school to find all my belongings destroyed in the hallway. Not moved, destroyed. My clothes had been cut with scissors, the fabric shredded into useless strips. My textbooks were water-damaged pages, warped and illegible like someone had deliberately poured something over them. My art supplies, the cheap watercolors and sketchbooks I'd saved for months to buy, were crushed and scattered. Paint tubes squeezed empty onto the floor in ugly smears. My mattress had been dragged from my room and left in the hallway, but not before someone had slashed it open. Stuffing spilled out like guts from a wound. Tiffany stood at the top of the stairs in a new designer outfit, examining her perfect nails with theatrical boredom. She didn't even try to hide her smile. "Mom's redecorating," she announced, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Your room is becoming my walk-in closet. Finally, somewhere worthy of my wardrobe. You're moving to the basement. Oh, and sorry about your stuff. The movers were so clumsy." She laughed high and cruel. "Actually, no, I'm not sorry. I told them to throw it all. Mom said we should have done this years ago." I looked down at the ruins of everything I owned. My favorite sweater, the one my grandmother had given me before she died, cut into ribbons. The journal where I'd written my thoughts, my dreams, my private pain, ripped apart with pages missing. I would later find those pages taped to Tiffany's mirror, my most vulnerable words used as decoration for her vanity. The basement wasn't just unfinished. It was inhuman. Raw concrete floors that were always damp and cold even in the suffocating heat of summer. Exposed pipes dripped constantly, creating puddles of rusty water that stank of mold and metal. A single bare bulb hung from a wire, casting harsh shadows that made everything look like a horror movie. There was no insulation, so winter cold seeped through the walls until my breath fogged in the air. The only heat came from an ancient furnace that rattled and shrieked through the night like something dying over and over, never quite finishing. This was where we stored broken Christmas decorations. Daniel's golf clubs he never used. Boxes of junk too worthless to keep, but too guilt-inducing to throw away. This was where spiders built elaborate webs in the corners, where I could hear rats scratching in the walls at night, where the ceiling was so low in places I had to duck to avoid hitting my head on exposed beams. This was where they decided I should live. I stood there in the hallway looking at my life in ruins on the floor, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break cleanly, which might have been merciful. It cracked the way ice cracks under too much weight, slowly. with terrible sounds splintering in all directions. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to run upstairs and destroy Tiffany's room the way she'd destroyed mine, rip her designer clothes to shreds, smash her makeup, break everything she loved. Instead, I knelt down and started gathering the scraps. What was left of my clothes, the ruined textbooks I'd need to somehow replace, the art supplies that could maybe be salvaged. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold anything. Oh, and Charlotte, Tiffany's voice floated down from above, sweet as poison. Mom said you're responsible for cleaning up this mess. She doesn't want to see any of your trash in her hallway when she gets home. You have an hour. I heard her walk away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor that used to be my ceiling. Then I heard her on the phone, her voice bright and excited. Yeah, we finally got rid of the charity case from the second floor. You should have seen her face. Mom said it was time she learned her place, and oh my God, watching her pick through the garbage was hilarious. I'm sending you pictures. I looked up and saw her leaning over the railing, phone pointed at me, taking photos of me on my knees surrounded by ruins. She was documenting my humiliation for her friends, for her followers, for anyone who wanted to laugh at the pathetic girl who'd thought she deserved a real room. The click of the camera shutter felt like bullets. I gathered what I could salvage and made my first trip down to the basement. The stairs were steep and narrow, no railing, just concrete steps, descending into darkness. The smell hit me before I reached the bottom. Mildew and rust, and something sour I couldn't identify. The bare bulb barely penetrated the gloom. I set down my armload of destroyed belongings and looked around at what would be my new home. There was no bed, no furniture at all, just concrete floor and concrete walls and that horrible dripping sound from the pipes. In the corner, water had pooled into a puddle that looked like it had been there for years, ringed with orange rust stains and something green growing at the edges. I made trip after trip, carrying down the remnants of my old life. Each time I came back up, Tiffany had left something new, a note taped to the wall. Basement suits you better, finally living at your level. Another time she'd poured her expensive perfume all over what was left of my clothes, the sickly sweet smell mixing with the must and mildew until it made me gag. It took me 3 hours to move everything and clean the hallway to Mom's satisfaction. My back ached, my hands were raw. I'd found a broom and tried to make the basement corner habitable. I swept away the worst of the debris, pushed the moldy Christmas boxes to the far wall, used an old tarp to cover the puddle in the corner. That night I tried to sleep on the concrete floor with my ruined mattress. The stuffing kept falling out through the slashes. The cold seeped up through the thin material into my bones. Above me I could hear them. Footsteps, laughter, the sound of the television. Normal family sounds from the people who'd thrown me away like garbage. I curled into a ball and cried as quietly as I could, pressing my sleeve against my mouth to muffle the sounds. I couldn't let them hear me break. Couldn't give them that satisfaction. The basement became my world, but calling it a world made it sound bigger than it was. It was a tomb, a prison, a place designed to break spirits. I found an old sheet in one of the storage boxes and tried to hang it to create some privacy, some illusion of walls. The concrete was too hard to nail into, so I used duct tape, spending $3 I didn't have at the dollar store. The tape kept falling down in the humidity, so I taped it again and again until my hands were sticky with adhesive. I found a space heater at a garage sale for $12. $12 that meant I didn't eat lunch for a week. It was old and the cord was frayed, and it made an electrical burning smell when it ran. But it was the only thing between me and hypothermia when winter came. I could only run it a few hours a day, because the electric meter was visible from Daniel's home office, and if the numbers climbed too high, he'd come down and take it away. At night, I could hear everything happening above me. Their footsteps on the floor that was my ceiling, each step a reminder that they were up there in warmth and light, while I was down here in the cold and dark. Their laughter filtering down through the heating vents, discussing their days, their plans, their lives that didn't include me. I heard Mom talking about redecorating Tiffany's new closet, my old room, discussing paint colors and custom shelving. Tiffany squealing with delight over new designer handbags. Daniel complaining about his golf game. Normal family conversations, like I'd never existed at all. I studied by flashlight because the single bare bulb wasn't bright enough to read by, and because when the power bill came, Daniel would storm down the stairs and accuse me of wasting electricity. He installed a separate meter for the basement, made me responsible for the charges. A 17-year-old with no income was somehow supposed to pay for the electricity it took to not freeze to death. I learned to wash my clothes in the utility sink using dish soap because I couldn't afford detergent. The water was always ice cold, and my hands would go numb scrubbing out stains. I'd hang everything on the exposed pipes to dry, and the basement would fill with the smell of mildew because nothing ever really dried in that humidity. My clothes started to smell like the basement, like mold and rust and despair, and kids at school noticed. They started calling me musty, adding it to their collection of insults. I learned which corner of the basement stayed warmest, which pipes dripped the least, which shadows were just shadows, and which might be rats. I learned to sleep in short bursts because the cold would wake me, or the furnace would kick on with a shriek that sounded like screaming, or I'd hear something scurrying in the darkness. I learned what it felt like to be truly alone, to live in a house full of people who wished you didn't exist, to be so close to family, close enough to hear them living their lives, but separated by more than just a floor and ceiling, separated by their complete indifference to whether I lived or died. Some nights, I would lie on that cold concrete floor, wrapped in every scrap of fabric I could find, and I would think about what it would be like to just stop existing, to slip away quietly in the night, frozen or sick, or just worn down until there was nothing left. Would they even notice? Would they care? Or would they just be relieved that the charity case had finally solved herself? But then I would hear a soft knock on the door at the top of the basement stairs. Ethan's knock. 3 quick taps, our secret code, and I would call up that I was okay even though I wasn't, and he would call down that he loved me. And somehow, that was enough to make it through another night. The basement didn't break me, but it taught me something important. It taught me that human beings can survive almost anything, that you can live in hell and not become a demon, that sometimes the cruelest thing people can do isn't killing you. It's making you live in conditions designed to make you wish you were dead, and then acting like they're being generous by giving you shelter at all. It taught me that I was stronger than they thought, stronger than I thought. And that strength forged in darkness burns hotter than any light. School became my sanctuary, except it wasn't really. Tiffany had graduated 2 years earlier, but her legacy remained. Her friends' younger siblings were in my grade, and they had learned from the best. Somewhere along the way, that video of me with the crushed flowers had made its way through school. People I'd never met knew me as Weed Girl. They would drop handfuls of grass clippings on my desk tape. Pictures of dandelions to my locker, make jokes about calling an exterminator. I learned to keep my head down, to eat lunch in the library, to time my bathroom breaks when the halls were empty. But I couldn't make myself invisible no matter how hard I tried. Jessica Hartwell, whose older sister ran in Tiffany's circle, seemed to take particular pleasure in my humiliation. She was captain of the volleyball team, beautiful in that effortless way that came with money and confidence, and never having been crushed under anyone's heel. One afternoon in October, I was in the library working on my biology homework when Jessica and 3 of her friends surrounded my table. They were wearing their volleyball uniforms, still flushed from practice. "Hey, Weed Girl," Jessica said loud enough that the librarian looked up sharply. "I heard your family keeps you in the basement like some kind of troll. Is that true?" I kept my eyes on my textbook, my face burning. "Please leave me alone." "Oh, it talks." One of her friends laughed. "I thought maybe you were mute. You never say anything in class. Just sit there like a weird little mouse." Jessica leaned down, her hands flat on my table. Her perfume was expensive, the kind that came in fancy bottles from department stores. "My sister says your sister told everyone that your real dad didn't want you. That's why you live in their basement. Because even your actual family didn't want you." The words hit like physical blows. I had never known my biological father. Mom had always told me he left before I was born, but she said it with such contempt that I learned not to ask questions. Daniel adopted me when he married Mom when I was 3. I didn't remember much from before that, just vague impressions of smaller apartments and Mom crying a lot. "That's not true," I whispered. But even as I said it, I wondered, was it? Had I been unwanted from the very beginning? My sister also said, Jessica continued, enjoying the way I was shrinking into myself, that your mom only keeps you around for the tax credit, that once you turn 18 you're out. So you better start figuring out where trolls like you go when they get kicked out from under the bridge. They left laughing, and I sat frozen at the library table, my biology textbook swimming in my vision. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, appeared beside me with a box of tissues and a sad smile. She didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with my tears. That night I lay on my makeshift bed in the basement and stared at the pipes overhead. Was it true? Was I really just a tax write-off, a burden they were counting down the days until they could discard? The thought made something inside me harden, calcify. If that's all I was to them, then I needed to start planning for the day when I was nothing at all. But then there was Ethan. My little brother had been born when I was 10. And from the moment I first held him in the hospital, something in me had shifted. He was small and perfect, and he looked at me like I hung the moon. As he grew, I became his favorite person. He would toddle after me, calling char char in his baby voice, bringing me his toys to fix his scrapes, to bandage his nightmares to chase away. Ethan was the only person in that house who loved me without condition or calculation, who cried when I moved to the basement and sneaked down to sleep on my floor until Mom dragged him back upstairs, who saved half his dessert to bring me when no one was looking, who drew pictures of us together that I taped to my concrete walls. In the fall of my junior year, when Ethan was 7, I noticed he was getting tired more easily. He would come home from school and immediately curl up on the couch, his chest heaving. His lips sometimes had a bluish tinge that terrified me. When he ran, he couldn't keep up with the other kids anymore. I begged Mom to take him to a doctor. She waved me off with irritation. "He's fine, Charlotte. You're being dramatic. You always make everything into a crisis for attention." "Mom, please, something's really wrong. Look at him." I said he's fine. Her voice had that edge that meant the discussion was over. "Stop trying to interfere with how I raise my son. Not our son, my son." The distinction was clear. Ethan was theirs. I was merely tolerated. But I couldn't let it go. I watched Ethan struggle to climb the stairs, watched him press his hand against his chest and wince, watched the color drain from his face when he exerted himself even slightly. Finally, I did something that would have consequences I couldn't have imagined. I called the school nurse and told her my concerns. The nurse did a basic check during a routine visit and immediately called Mom. Ethan was sent to the emergency room that day. The diagnosis came quickly: congenital heart defect, severe enough that he needed surgery and soon. Without intervention, the doctor said with the carefully neutral voice that doctors use when they're giving you the worst news of your life, Ethan had maybe a year. The house exploded into activity. Mom was on the phone constantly crying decoratively about "my poor baby" to anyone who would listen. Daniel talked to insurance companies, his voice sharp and aggressive. Tiffany posted emotional updates on social media, positioning herself as the devoted big sister in a family crisis. Donations poured in. Strangers sent cards and gift baskets. For the first time in years, I let myself hope. They loved Ethan. They would save him. Everything would be okay. Then came the evening 3 weeks after the diagnosis. I had been working my usual shift at Rosie's Diner, a grimy little place near the bus station, where the tips were terrible, but they paid cash under the table and didn't ask too many questions about how old I really was. I came home early because it was a slow night, and Rosie had let me go, telling me to get some rest because I looked like death warmed over. The house was quiet when I walked in, too quiet. Mom and Tiffany had gone to some charity event, playing the roles of brave mother and supportive sister for an audience of wealthy donors. I headed toward the basement, bone-tired and ready to collapse, when I heard paper shredding. The sound came from Daniel's home office, a room I was explicitly forbidden from entering. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I could see him feeding documents into the industrial shredder he used for his investment firm paperwork. But these weren't business documents. I could see the letterhead: Children's Hospital, Ethan's cardiologist, the insurance company. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" Daniel didn't even startle. He looked up at me with the same expression he might give to a fly buzzing near his drink, cold, calculating, annoyed at the interruption. "Cutting our losses," he said, simply feeding another page into the machine. "The surgery's going to cost us a fortune even after insurance. The kid's weak, always has been. He'll probably have complications, need more surgeries down the line. That's years of medical bills, special care, limitations on what he can do. Frankly, Charlotte, it's better for everyone this way." The world tilted sickeningly. I couldn't process what I was hearing. "You're going to let him die. You're going to murder your own son. Don't be dramatic." His voice was so casual it made my skin crawl. "I'm making a practical decision. Ethan was an accident anyway. Your mother wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but I thought a son would be good for my image. Turns out I was wrong. A sickly kid is worse than no kid at all. People pity you instead of respect you." I lunged for the papers still stacked on his desk, the ones he hadn't shredded yet. Medical records, treatment plans, bills. If I could save them, if I could prove what he was doing, someone would help. Someone would stop him. Daniel moved faster than I expected for a man in his 50s. His hand cracked across my face so hard that stars exploded in my vision. I stumbled backward and the room spun. My head connected with the edge of his mahogany desk, and the world went briefly black. When my vision cleared, I was on the floor. Blood dripped from my split lip onto the expensive Persian rug. Daniel stood over me, not even breathing hard, straightening his tie like he'd merely swatted a mosquito. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice pleasant, now conversational. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, if you try to interfere with my decisions regarding my household, I will make sure you regret it. You're already a charity case. One call to social services about your behavior, your instability, your lies, and you'll be in the system. Foster care, Charlotte. You know what happens to 17-year-old girls in foster care." He crouched down, bringing his face level with mine. His breath smelled like the expensive bourbon he favored. "No one will believe you anyway. Look at you, living in a basement because you're so troubled and difficult. Failing to appreciate everything this family has given you. Making wild accusations because you're jealous of the attention Ethan gets. That's the story everyone will hear." The office door opened then, and Mom walked in, still in her evening gown from the charity event. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance. Me on the floor bleeding, Daniel standing over me, the shredder still humming, the hospital documents scattered across his desk. For one insane moment, I thought she would help me, would be horrified, would protect her youngest child. Instead, Vivian Pierce stepped over me like I was a piece of furniture, picked up her teacup from Daniel's desk, and took a delicate sip. "If you want a medal for suffering Charlotte join the military, this is just parenting. Tough love builds character." "He's going to let Ethan die." I choked out, blood and tears mixing. "He's destroying his medical records." Mom looked at me with something like pity, which was worse than hatred. "Ethan has a condition that may or may not respond to treatment. Sometimes, Charlotte, the kindest thing is to let nature take its course, rather than putting a child through endless suffering. You're too young and too selfish to understand that we're actually thinking of what's best for Ethan." "You're lying." The words came out as a sob. "You're lying and you know it." "I know you're upset," Mom said in that calm, reasonable voice she used when she wanted to sound like the rational adult dealing with a hysterical child. "But Daniel and I have discussed this thoroughly with the doctors, multiple doctors, in fact. The prognosis isn't good, honey. The surgery has a low success rate. Even if it works, Ethan will need more procedures. He'll never be normal. Is it fair to him to put him through all that pain for a half-life? The doctor said he had a 90% chance of full recovery. The doctor said a lot of things." Mom set down her teacup. "Now go to your room, Charlotte, clean yourself up, and remember what Daniel said. If you make accusations like this to anyone, we'll have no choice but to seek professional help for you. Psychiatric help. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. They were going to let Ethan die, and if I tried to stop them, they would have me committed, locked away where no one would listen to me. I pulled myself up from the floor, every part of me aching, and stumbled toward the basement stairs. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice, bright and cheerful now. "How is the rest of the event?" "Productive," Daniel replied. "The Hendersons are considering a major investment." They were talking about business. Ethan's death warrant was still spread across the desk, half fed into the shredder, and they were discussing investments. That night, I lay on my basement floor and stared at the ceiling until the pipes blurred and swam. Something inside me didn't just break. It transformed, alchemized. The scared, desperate girl who wanted her family's love died, and something else was born, something harder, something that had teeth. If they wouldn't save Ethan, I would. And if I had to destroy them in the process, so be it. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a clarity I'd never experienced. My face was swollen where Daniel had hit me, my head throbbed where it had connected with the desk, but my mind was crystal clear. I had roughly 10 months before the doctor said Ethan would decline past the point of surgical intervention. 10 months to become someone who could save a life. I moved Ethan into the basement with me. Mom protested at first, something about it being inappropriate, but I told her I'd keep him quiet and out of the way, that I'd handle all his care so she wouldn't have to be bothered. That seemed to satisfy her. Tiffany complained about losing her built-in prop for social media, but Daniel shut her down with a look. They were probably glad to have him out of sight as he got sicker. Ethan didn't understand why we were camping in the basement, but he thought it was an adventure. I told him we were pioneers exploring the wilderness. I hung sheets to make a fort, strung up Christmas lights I found in storage. I made it magical for him while my mind raced through calculations and plans. First, I needed money. A lot of money. My job at Rosie's Diner paid $6 an hour under the table. At that rate, I'd need to work for several lifetimes to afford Ethan's surgery. I picked up a second job washing dishes at a Mexican restaurant, then a third doing data entry remotely for a company that didn't ask questions as long as the work got done. I worked from 6 a.m. until midnight, sleeping in 4-hour bursts, running on coffee and desperation. But it wasn't enough. Even working 3 jobs, sleeping on the cold basement floor, eating 1 meal a day, I was barely making a dent in what I needed. The surgery alone was going to cost close to $200,000 after insurance. Insurance we didn't have because Daniel had canceled Ethan's coverage. That's when I started researching. The public library became my second home. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, who had comforted me that day in school, started leaving books for me. Not just any books, business books, marketing, e-commerce, investment strategies. She never said anything, just left them on my usual table with a knowing look. One evening, she sat down across from me while I was frantically taking notes on dropshipping and profit margins. "Charlotte," she said gently, "I don't know what you're dealing with, but I can see you're fighting for something important." I looked up at her, this kind woman who had witnessed my humiliation, who somehow saw that I was more than weed girl. "I have to save my brother." She nodded slowly. "Then you need to be smart about this. Working yourself to death won't save anyone. You need leverage. You need something that can scale." "I don't have anything," I said helplessly. "I'm nobody. I have no money, no connections, no skills that matter." Mrs. Chen smiled. "You're resourceful. You're determined. And from what I've seen, you're willing to learn. That's more than most people start with." She pushed another book across the table. "Read this, then come talk to me tomorrow." The book was about unconventional success stories. People who built businesses from nothing. A woman who started a makeup empire mixing products in her kitchen. A man who turned a passion for vintage furniture into $1 million restoration business. A teenager who taught herself coding and built apps that sold for 6 figures. I read it cover to cover that night by flashlight in my basement fortress. Ethan slept beside me, his breathing slightly labored even in sleep. And slowly an idea began to form. I thought about that Mother's Day. About the wildflowers I'd picked so carefully bound with recycled ribbon. About Mom crushing them under her designer heels while Tiffany filmed and laughed. About being called weed girl, like it was the worst insult imaginable. What if it wasn't an insult? What if it was an identity? What if I took their contempt and made it into something powerful? The next day, I found a rotting greenhouse on the outskirts of town, tucked behind an abandoned strip mall, like a secret. The sign hanging crooked by one chain said Evelyn's Garden in faded hand-painted letters. Through the dirty windows, I could see plants everywhere, wild and overgrown, but somehow thriving in their neglect. The door groaned when I pushed it open. The smell hit me immediately, earth and green growing things and possibility. And standing in the middle of it all, wielding pruning shears, with the precision of a surgeon, was a woman who had to be at least 70. Her hands were gnarled like old tree roots, her face weather-worn, but sharp eyes like a hawk's that saw straight through you. She looked up at me and didn't seem surprised to see a scrawny teenager with a bruised face standing in her doorway at 7 a.m. on a school day. "You running from something or running toward something?" she asked, her voice gravelly from years of cigarettes or dust or both. I thought about lying, making myself seem less desperate, less damaged. But something about her expression told me she'd seen through worse lies than anything I could manufacture. "Both," I answered honestly. She studied me for a long moment, those hawk eyes taking in the details. The second-hand clothes I'd tried to keep clean. The shadows under my eyes from too many nights without sleep. The desperation I was trying so hard to hide. The determination I couldn't hide even if I wanted to. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then you better come in. The ones who run from and toward at the same time are the ones who move fastest." "I'm Evelyn. You got a name, girl." "Charlotte." "Charlotte?" She said it like she was tasting it, testing its weight. "That's a good name, strong. All right, Charlotte, you want to learn about plants?" "I want to learn about business," I said, "but I think plants might be part of it." A smile cracked across her weathered face. "Smart girl, honest too. That's rare. Most people come in here wanting me to teach them how to make pretty bouquets, sell them to rich people, make easy money. But there's no such thing as easy money, especially not in this business. I don't need easy, I said. I need possible. Evelyn set down her pruning shears and really looked at me then. How old are you? 17. Why aren't you in school? I'll go after. I work 3 jobs. I have 4 hours between the night shift ending and school starting. I thought maybe. I trailed off, suddenly aware of how insane this must sound. A kid showing up at a decrepit greenhouse at dawn, asking to learn business. But Evelyn just laughed to sound like rocks tumbling. 4 hours, you think you can learn what I know in 4 hours a day? My heart sank. I can pay, not much, but I don't want your money, Charlotte. She picked up a pot with a struggling orchid, its leaves yellowed and drooping. You see this plant, most people would throw it away. Call it dead, not worth saving. But it's not dead. It's just stressed. It needs the right conditions, the right care, someone who sees what it could be instead of what it looks like right now. She handed me the pot. You come here every morning those 4 hours you got. You work, I teach. We see what grows, but I don't do half measures and I don't do excuses. You commit or you walk away now. Which is it? I took the pot, felt the weight of it, the responsibility. This dying plant in my hands felt like a metaphor, like a test, like a promise. I commit. Good. Evelyn turned back to her work. Start by repotting that orchid. Supplies are in the back. If you kill it, we try again. That's how you learn. You kill a lot of things before you learn how to make them live. I worked in that greenhouse every morning for 4 hours, then ran to make the bus to school. Sat through classes half-conscious, went to my first job, then my second, then my third, then back to my basement where Ethan would be waiting. I'd help him with his homework, make sure he ate, tell him stories until he fell asleep. Then I'd study business plans, marketing strategies, plant hybridization, profit margins, supply chains. Evelyn taught me everything, not just about plants, though I learned that too. How to propagate succulents from single leaves. How to force bulbs into early bloom. How to cross-pollinate to create new varieties. How to recognize diseases and deficiencies. How soil composition affected growth. How light and water and temperature could transform something ordinary into something extraordinary. But more than that, she taught me about survival. Plants are like people, she'd say while showing me how to trim dead growth. The ones that survive aren't always the biggest or the strongest. They're the ones that adapt. The ones that learn to thrive in conditions that would kill something more delicate. She showed me the wildflowers growing in the cracks of the parking lot outside. You see these dandelions, clover, wild violets. People call them weeds, poison them, pull them up, curse them for existing, but they survive anyway. They're designed to. Deep root systems so they can't be easily removed. Seeds that spread on the slightest breeze, the ability to grow in the worst soil, the harshest conditions. They're survivors, Charlotte. Never underestimate a survivor. I thought about Mom crushing my wildflower bouquet, about Tiffany calling me weed girl, about Daniel saying I was a charity case, about Jessica Hartwell and her friends laughing about me living in a basement like a troll. Maybe they were right, maybe I was a weed. But maybe that wasn't the insult they thought it was. 3 months into my apprenticeship with Evelyn, I met Michael. He was 19, tall and lanky, with perpetually dirt-stained hands and an easy smile that made something in my chest ache, because I couldn't remember the last time someone had smiled at me like I was worth smiling at. He'd taken a gap year before college to figure things out, which apparently meant working part-time at Evelyn's greenhouse and living in his parents' garage. He had that kind of comfortable privilege that came with parents who supported his journey of self-discovery, who thought gap years were healthy, who didn't threaten to commit him if he stepped out of line. At first, I resented him. Everything came so easily to him. The easy smile, the easy life, the luxury of time to figure things out. But then I watched him work. He loved plants the way most people loved art or music. He talked to them, coaxed them, celebrated every new shoot like a personal victory. And he was brilliant with technology, could build a website in an afternoon, could make social media algorithms dance to his tune. One morning, about a month after he started, he found me in the propagation room at 6 a.m., surrounded by hundreds of tiny plastic containers filled with wildflower seedlings. I'd been crossbreeding varieties trying to create something unique, something that would sell, something that would save Ethan. "What are you doing here so early?" he asked. Not accusatory, just curious. I could have lied, should have lied, but I was so tired of lying, of hiding, of pretending, and maybe something about the way he looked at the seedlings like they mattered made me trust him. "I'm trying to create something that doesn't exist yet," I said. "I'm trying to save my brother's life." Michael sat down at the concrete floor next to me. "Tell me." So I did. Not everything, not the worst parts, but enough. About Ethan's heart condition, about needing money for surgery, about Mom and Daniel canceling his insurance, about my 3 jobs and my 4 hours of sleep and my desperate plan to build something from nothing. When I finished, Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need?" Those 4 words changed everything. Michael became my partner, my first real friend, my co-conspirator. He built me a website that was sleek and professional and made my seedlings look like works of art. He taught me about SEO, about social media marketing, about how to tell a story that made people care. He helped me photograph every plant, every bloom, creating a portfolio that was stunning. We named the business Dust and Thorns. It felt right, powerful, a middle finger disguised as poetry. The concept was simple but unique. I was creating hybrid wildflowers that didn't exist in nature, crosses between those tough, determined weeds and exotic, expensive species. Flowers that had the resilience of dandelions with the beauty of orchids. Plants that could survive neglect but flourished with care. They were gorgeous and strange and utterly unlike anything else on the market. Our first sale was a $30 cutting of a hybrid I'd created by crossing white clover with a rare Asiatic lily. The resulting plant had delicate white flowers shot through with purple veins, with a root system so aggressive it could grow in pure gravel. I called it grace for the kind of forgiveness I'd never received, but might someday learn to give. When the sale notification came through, I started crying. Michael bought cheap champagne from the liquor store down the street, and we drank it from paper cups in the greenhouse, while Evelyn shook her head at us and smiled. $30. It was nothing and everything. But $30 became 60. Became 100, became 500. Within 3 months, Dust and Thorns was generating consistent income. Within 6 months, I was making more from the business than from all 3 of my other jobs combined. I quit the data entry, then the restaurant. I kept Rosie's Diner because Rosie had been kind to me and because I needed to remember where I came from. The money went into a separate account I'd opened in my own name at a bank across town where no one knew me. Every dollar was cataloged, tracked, protected. This was Ethan's life, and I guarded it like a dragon guarding treasure. Meanwhile, at home, things were getting worse. Ethan was declining. He couldn't walk up the stairs anymore without stopping to rest. His lips were blue more often than not. He'd lost weight. He wasn't dying in the dramatic way of movies all at once with climactic music. He was fading degree by degree, and watching it was like having my heart torn out in slow motion. Mom and Daniel had settled into their narrative. The brave parents dealing with their terminally ill son, the grief they were pre-performing for their social circles. Tiffany had abandoned pretense entirely, barely coming home focused on her new job as an assistant event coordinator at some fashion company. The packages started arriving at the house. Big boxes from plant suppliers, specialty soil, grow lights, packaging materials. They accumulated in the garage because Mom and Daniel had made it clear the basement was already too cluttered with me and Ethan. Tiffany came home one weekend and complained about the boxes blocking her car. "What is all this junk, Charlotte? Are you hoarding garbage now, Mom? You need to deal with her. She's clearly got mental issues." I smiled sweetly. "Just stuff I buy cheap online and resell for profit, making a little spending money." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "You're buying trash to sell trash. That's the most pathetic thing I've ever heard." If only she knew. Those boxes contained $50,000 worth of inventory. My business was growing faster than I dared to dream. Dust and Thorns had become a cult favorite among interior designers and plant enthusiasts. My hybrids were showing up in magazine spreads, in celebrity Instagram posts, in boutique hotels. I'd created a second hybrid variety, this one a cross between wild violet and an African violet, resulting in a compact plant that produced masses of deep purple flowers and could survive a nuclear winter. I called it Lionheart for Ethan. By month 8, I had enough money. Enough for the surgery, the hospitalization, the follow-up care, everything. I'd done it. Against every odd, working myself half to death, I had saved my brother. That's when I started researching charitable foundations. If Mom and Daniel wouldn't provide insurance for Ethan, if they'd destroyed his medical records and canceled his coverage, then I needed to find another way. A way that looked legitimate, that couldn't be traced back to me, that would force them to allow the surgery. I found the Children's Heart Foundation, a legitimate nonprofit that helped families in need. The application was brutal: 30 pages of questions about financial hardship, family, circumstances, medical necessity. I filled it out in the library. using their printer, creating a paper trail that existed outside my family's awareness. The essay section asked why we needed help. I wrote the truth carefully edited, about a single mother who couldn't afford insurance, about a stepfather who was financially comfortable but had declined to help, about a teenage sister working multiple jobs to try to make up the difference, about a little boy with a brave heart who deserved a chance at life. I attached medical records I'd secretly copied before Daniel shredded them. I included photographs of Ethan, his eyes too large in his thinning face, his smile still brave despite everything. I made a video of him talking about what he wanted to be when he grew up. An astronaut, he said. He wanted to see the stars up close. The application reviewer called me 2 weeks later. Her name was Patricia, and she cried while telling me Ethan's case had been approved. They would cover 80% of the costs. Between their support and what I'd saved, we had enough. More than enough. "Your brother is lucky to have you," Patricia said. I thought about Daniel's fist, Mom's indifference, the basement that smelled like mold and defeat. "I'm the lucky one," I told her. "He's the only thing that kept me human." The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in March, exactly 9 months and 2 weeks after I'd watched Daniel feed Ethan's records into that shredder. I forged Mom's signature on the consent forms, practiced until I could replicate her handwriting in my sleep. I told her the foundation had handled everything, that she just needed to show up at the hospital and smile for the cameras because they wanted publicity photos. Vivian Pierce never missed an opportunity for good press. She agreed immediately. The night before the surgery, I lay on the basement floor with Ethan curled against my side. He was scared, trying not to show it. 7 years old and so damn brave, it broke my heart. "Shar Shar." His voice was small in the darkness. "What if I don't wake up?" I held him tighter. "You will, I promise you will. And when you do, we're going to do all the things you want. We'll go to the planetarium, we'll learn the names of all the constellations, we'll stay up late and watch meteor showers. We'll do everything, Ethan, everything. Will you be there when I wake up?" "I'll be there, I'll always be there." The surgery took 7 hours. I sat in that waiting room with Michael on one side and Ms. Evelyn on the other. Mom and Tiffany showed up for the first hour, long enough to take photos with Ethan, before they wheeled him back long enough to post about their brave family on social media. Then they left for lunch and didn't come back. Daniel never came at all. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged, still in his surgical scrubs, my heart stopped. His face was unreadable. Then he smiled. "The surgery was successful, better than we hoped, actually. Ethan's going to be just fine." I collapsed into Michael's arms and sobbed. Relief and rage and joy and grief all tangled together until I couldn't tell them apart. Ethan would live. My baby brother would live. The recovery was long but steady. Ethan transformed in front of my eyes. Color returned to his face. His lips were pink. He could breathe without gasping. Within weeks, he was running down the hospital corridors, driving the nurses crazy, laughing until his sides hurt. Mom and Daniel were pleased in their distant way. Tiffany posted a photo shoot she'd arranged Ethan in a hospital gown, surrounded by balloons, her hugging him with the kind of performative affection that made my skin crawl. The caption read, "Miracles happen, so grateful for our medical team and for modern medicine. Family is everything. #blessed, #strong, family, #never give up." The post went viral. Tiffany gained 15,000 followers overnight. She was interviewed by a local news station about the power of family and perseverance. She cried beautifully on camera, talked about how hard it had been, how they'd all pulled together, how love had seen them through. Not once did she mention that I existed. I stood in the doorway of Ethan's hospital room, watching her perform grief and relief for the cameras, and felt that cold thing inside me sharpen into something like a blade. They hadn't saved him. They'd tried to kill him. And now they were profiting from his survival, building their reputations on my work, my sacrifice, my love. I smiled to myself. Let them have their moment. Let them believe they'd gotten away with it. Because I was planning something they would never see coming. Dust and thorns continued to explode. By the time Ethan came home from the hospital, the business had generated over $300,000 in revenue. Michael and I had hired 2 part-time employees. We'd moved to a larger facility on the other side of town, a proper greenhouse with climate control and professional equipment. I had developed 10 signature hybrid varieties, each more unique than the last. Grace and Lionheart remained the best sellers. They'd become status symbols in certain circles. Interior designers fought over them. Luxury hotels featured them in their lobbies. A celebrity wedding planner used them exclusively and posted about them constantly. We couldn't keep them in stock. The irony was delicious. These flowers bred from the weeds Mom had crushed under her heel were now adorning the homes and events of the wealthy elite. The very people Mom and Tiffany tried so hard to impress. I kept my involvement secret from my family. As far as they knew, I was still working at Rosie's Diner, still sleeping in the basement, still the charity case weed girl they could ignore. I played the part perfectly, kept my head down, my clothes secondhand, my presence minimal. But I was watching, learning, planning. Tiffany's career was taking off. Her success with Ethan's recovery story had gotten her promoted to event director at Luminaire, one of the most prestigious event planning companies in the city. She was handling bigger clients, more important events, building a reputation as someone who could deliver magic. I started following her work carefully, watching what events she planned, what vendors she used, what her aesthetic preferences were. I noticed she was always looking for unique flowers, something nobody else had, something that would make her event stand out. That's when I had Michael reach out to Luminaire's purchasing department. Professional, polished, nothing that would connect back to me. He sent them a portfolio of our work. Photos of Grace and Lionheart in various settings, styled beautifully, looking absolutely stunning. The purchasing manager called back within an hour. She wanted samples. She wanted pricing. She wanted to know if we could handle large-scale events. We could handle whatever they needed. The first order was small, a test. Flowers for a private birthday party. We delivered perfection. The second order was bigger, a corporate event. We exceeded expectations. By the sixth order, we'd become one of Luminaire's preferred vendors. Tiffany still had no idea. She was too important now to deal with vendor details. She had assistants for that. She just approved the aesthetic and moved on to the next high-profile client. I bided my time, watched and waited. The perfect opportunity would come. It always did. You just had to be patient. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving. The change in him was miraculous. He grew 3 inches in 4 months. His cheeks filled out. He played soccer, ran track, did all the things he'd never been able to do. He was happy, healthy, alive. I'd moved us out of the basement finally, told Mom and Daniel that I'd saved enough from working to rent a small apartment. They were relieved to have us gone, one less complication in their perfect house. They didn't even ask how a 17-year-old diner waitress could afford rent. They just wanted us out. The apartment was tiny, a 1-bedroom in a questionable neighborhood, but it was ours. Ethan had the bedroom. I slept on the couch. We had heat that worked, water that was clean, windows that let in light. It felt like a palace. Ms. Evelyn co-signed the lease. She'd become something like a grandmother to both of us, this fierce old woman who saw us and valued us and believed we deserved better. She taught Ethan about plants, let him work in the greenhouse after school, paid him in cash, and life lessons. Michael was there, constantly fixing things in our apartment that broke, bringing groceries, helping Ethan with homework, making me laugh on the days when the weight of everything felt crushing. Something was growing between us, careful and tentative but real. We didn't rush it. Both of us understood that trust was something you built slowly, carefully, like a garden. I turned 18 in April. No celebration at the Pierce house, no acknowledgement at all. But Michael and Ethan and Ms. Evelyn threw me a party in the greenhouse, surrounded by blooming flowers and strung lights and people who actually loved me. It was the best birthday of my life. Legally an adult now, I made it official. Changed all of Ethan's medical records to list me as his legal guardian. Mom signed the papers without reading them, relieved to be released from responsibility. Daniel didn't even pretend to care. Ethan was mine now, officially and completely. The business grew exponentially. By summer, Dust and Thorns had expanded to 3 locations. We had 15 employees. We were shipping nationwide. Revenue had crossed the $1 million mark. I was 18 years old, and I'd built something real, something valuable, something that couldn't be taken away. And then Tiffany's assistant called with the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Luminaire had been contracted to plan the Riverside Gala, the biggest charity event of the year. 500 guests, all the city's elite, massive press coverage. The theme was natural elegance, and Tiffany wanted flowers that would make people gasp. Exclusive varieties they couldn't get anywhere else. A signature look that would define the event, and by extension define her as a visionary. She wanted Grace and Lionheart. Thousands of them. She wanted them to dominate the space, to transform the venue into something magical. She wanted exclusivity, a guarantee that no other event would use these flowers for 6 months. The contract was worth $75,000. More importantly, it was Tiffany's signature event, her chance to cement her reputation as the best in the business. I told Michael to accept, to agree to everything, to make sure Tiffany knew these flowers would be the centerpiece of her triumph. Then I started planning the other part, the part Tiffany would never see coming. The gala was scheduled for September 15th. I had 4 months to prepare, 4 months to make sure every detail was perfect. This wasn't just about flowers, this was about justice. I spent those months carefully crafting my public persona. Dust and Thorns needed a face, a founder story, something compelling. Michael helped me build a social media presence carefully curated. Photos of me in the greenhouse, dirt under my nails surrounded by blooming plants. Stories about creating beauty from difficult circumstances. Videos of the hybridization process. Nothing that mentioned my family, but enough to make me seem like an inspiring young entrepreneur. We did interviews with gardening magazines, with local business journals, with lifestyle blogs. The story was always the same girl, from difficult circumstances, build successful business through determination and unique vision. Self-made, self-taught, proving that anyone can succeed with enough grit. The press loved it. I was featured in a 30 under 30 list. A business podcast wanted me as a guest. A morning show asked me to do a segment on urban farming. I said yes to everything, building visibility, building credibility, building toward September. I also reached out to the charities that would benefit from the gala. The Children's Heart Foundation, the organization that had helped save Ethan. I made a substantial donation, enough to get their attention. I offered to increase my support to become a major donor. I met with their board, shared Ethan's story, created relationships. By August, I'd positioned Dust and Thorns as one of the gala's primary sponsors. Not just the flower vendor, a sponsor. My name and company logo would be in the program, on the banners and the press releases. Tiffany's assistant had processed the paperwork without realizing the connection. Why would she? Charlotte Pierce, the charity case basement dweller, and Charlotte Pierce, the successful entrepreneur, existed in completely different worlds. Until they didn't. The week before the gala, I went shopping. For the first time in my life, I bought clothes that were beautiful and well-made. A dress for the event, deep green silk that made my eyes look like emeralds. Shoes that didn't hurt. Jewelry that was simple but real. I got my hair done professionally, got a facial, got my nails manicured. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The scared girl who'd knelt among crushed flowers was gone. In her place stood someone confident, polished, powerful. Someone who'd survived everything they'd thrown at her and turned it into armor. The night of the gala, I dressed carefully. Michael picked me up in his newly purchased car. Nothing fancy, but clean and reliable. Ethan was staying with Ms. Evelyn, disappointed he couldn't come, but understanding this was important. "You ready for this?" Michael asked as we pulled up to the venue. The building was stunning, lit up like a jewel box. Red carpet at the entrance, photographers everywhere, elegantly dressed people streaming inside. Through the windows, I could see my flowers. Thousands of Grace and Lionheart blooms, transforming the space into something ethereal. White and red, delicate and bold, everywhere the eye could see. "I've been ready for this my whole life," I said. We went in through the main entrance, gave our names at the check-in. The volunteer checking the list brightened when she saw my name. "Ms. Pierce, oh, we're so grateful for your support. Your flowers are absolutely stunning. Everyone's talking about them." I smiled. "Thank you. I'm glad they're working well." Inside, the venue was breathtaking. Tiffany had outdone herself. My flowers were displayed in massive arrangements, in hanging installations, in delicate centerpieces. Soft lighting made them glow. They were the defining feature of the space, impossible to ignore, absolutely show-stopping. I spotted my family immediately, Mom and Daniel near the bar, dressed expensively, holding court with a group of business associates. They looked prosperous, successful, exactly like the kind of people who belonged at an event like this. Tiffany was everywhere at once, greeting guests, directing staff, beaming with pride. She wore a designer gown that probably cost more than our entire apartment's worth of furniture. She looked happy, triumphant, completely in her element. None of them had seen me yet. I kept to the edges watching. The event began. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. The host of a local news program served as MC, charming and practiced. Then came the portion of the evening dedicated to thanking sponsors. The MC began reading names, each sponsor getting a polite round of applause. I waited, heart-pounding, for my moment. "And we're especially grateful to our premier sponsors," the MC continued, "including Dust and Thorns, the innovative floral design company that has transformed this space into something magical. In fact, these stunning Grace and Lionheart varieties you see everywhere tonight are exclusive creations bred specifically for resilience and beauty. And I'm delighted to announce that the founder of Dust and Thorns is here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Charlotte Pierce. The applause was warm, enthusiastic. I stood and walked toward the stage, my heels clicking on the polished floor. I could feel eyes on me, curious, appreciative. And then I heard it. The exact moment my family recognized me. A gasp from Mom. A choked sound from Daniel. Tiffany's voice sharp and confused. What the hell? I climbed the steps to the stage, accepted the microphone from the MC, and looked out at 500 of the city's most influential people. Front and center, I could see my family. Mom had gone pale. Daniel's face was flushed with anger. Tiffany looked like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice steady and clear. I'm Charlotte, and I'm the founder of Dust and Thorns. For those who don't know, Dust and Thorns specializes in creating hybrid flowers that combine resilience with beauty. Every variety we create is bred from wildflowers, those plants most people call weeds. I paused, letting that sink in, letting Tiffany remember calling me Weed Girl, letting Mom remember crushing flowers under her heel. The philosophy behind Dust and Thorns is simple. The strongest, most beautiful things often come from the harshest conditions. Wildflowers grow in abandoned lots and cracked concrete in places where nothing else survives. And when you give them attention, when you nurture them, instead of trying to destroy them, they become extraordinary. Someone in the audience whooped. A few people applauded. I smiled. The varieties you see tonight, Grace and Lionheart, have special meaning to me. Grace represents the kind of forgiveness we all struggle with. The ability to transform pain into something beautiful. I looked directly at Mom. Lionheart is named for my younger brother Ethan, who survived a life-threatening heart condition through his own bravery and the support of organizations like the Children's Heart Foundation. More applause. I saw Patricia, the woman who'd approved Ethan's case, dabbing at her eyes. I'm thrilled to announce that Dust and Thorns will be donating 30% of tonight's proceeds and 20% of all future profits to organizations supporting at-risk children. Children who fall through the cracks. Children who need someone to believe in them, to fight for them, to see their potential, instead of treating them as disposable. The applause was thunderous now, but I wasn't done. Some of you might not know that I grew up here in the city, in what looked from the outside like a very privileged home. I saw Mom stand up, her face horrified. Daniel grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down. Tiffany had frozen completely. But privilege is complicated. I continued, my voice gentle but caring, to every corner of the room. Sometimes the most beautiful houses hide the darkest secrets. Sometimes families that look perfect from the outside are built on cruelty and neglect. Sometimes children are treated as burdens, as charity cases, as weeds to be crushed and discarded. The room had gone very quiet. People were leaning forward, riveted. When I was 17, my baby brother was diagnosed with a congenital heart defect. He needed surgery urgently, surgery that would save his life. But the people who were supposed to protect him, who were supposed to love him, decided he wasn't worth the investment. My voice didn't waver. They canceled his insurance. They destroyed his medical records. They planned to let him die because he was inconvenient. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw phones coming out, people starting to record. So I built this business. Dust and Thorns started in a decrepit greenhouse with nothing but determination and borrowed supplies. I worked 3 jobs. I taught myself everything. And I saved my brother's life with money I earned creating beauty from the weeds I was told I was. I finally looked at Tiffany. She was crying, makeup running, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The flowers you've been admiring tonight, the ones that have made this event so beautiful, were created by the girl who was called Weed Girl, by the charity case who lived in a basement, by the daughter who was told she was worthless. I smiled, and it wasn't kind. These weeds learned to grow thorns, and these thorns learned to bloom. The applause when I finished was deafening. People were standing, some were crying. The MC looked stunned, clearly not having expected this turn. I handed back the microphone and walked off the stage, directly toward my family. Mom tried to speak first. Charlotte, you're making a scene. These are lies. This is slander. We'll sue you for what? I stopped right in front of them. Up close, they looked smaller, less significant. For telling the truth, I have records, Mother. Every shredded document I photographed. Every conversation I recorded. Every bruise, every cruel word, every moment of neglect. I documented everything. So please sue me. I would love to have this conversation in court in front of a judge with journalists present. Daniel's face was purple with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "Ungrateful?" I laughed, and it sounded cold even to my own ears. "For what should I be grateful? For the basement, for the beatings, for watching you try to murder my brother?" Tiffany found her voice finally. "You ruined my event. You ruined my career. This was supposed to be my night." I looked at her with something like pity. "This was never your night, Tiffany. These are my flowers, my work, my vision. You just thought you could take credit for it the way you've taken credit for everything else. But here's the truth: you didn't make this event beautiful. I did, and everyone here knows it now." People were staring. Phones were definitely recording. The local news crew that had been covering the event was pushing closer. My family was being exposed in real time, their perfect facade cracking for everyone to see. A reporter pushed forward. "Ms. Pierce, are you saying your family abused you and your brother?" Before I could answer, Patricia from the Children's Heart Foundation stepped up. "I can confirm that Charlotte Pierce applied for emergency funding for her brother's heart surgery. The application detailed financial neglect and medical abandonment. The case was one of the most severe we'd reviewed." Another voice. An older man I didn't recognize. "I'm Dr. James Morrison. I performed Ethan Pierce's surgery. The boy's condition was life-threatening and easily treatable, but his insurance had been canceled and his parents refused to authorize treatment. This young woman saved her brother's life through her own resources when his parents wouldn't." The crowd's mood was shifting. Anger directed at my family, sympathy and admiration directed at me. Mom tried one more time. "This is a misunderstanding. Charlotte has always been troubled dramatic. I think we've heard enough." The MC's voice cut through sharp and cold. "This is a charity event benefiting at-risk children. Perhaps it's time for certain people to leave." Security was already moving in. Mom and Daniel were escorted out, Daniel blustering about lawyers and slander. Tiffany followed her career imploding in real time as people pulled out their phones to Google the unfolding scandal. I stood in the middle of the gala, surrounded by my flowers, and felt something break open inside me. Not pain, not anger, something like freedom. The rest of the evening was a blur. People approached me with support, with business cards, with tears, and stories of their own. The gala raised twice its fundraising goal. My flowers were photographed from every angle. Dust and Thorns' website crashed from traffic. Orders poured in faster than we could process them. By midnight, my family's scandal was trending on social media. By morning, it would be in every newspaper. Tiffany's company would distance themselves from her. Daniel's business associates would quietly sever ties. Mom's social standing would evaporate. And me, I went home to my tiny apartment, where Ethan was sleeping peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a strong, steady rhythm, where Michael was waiting with takeout and a gentle smile, where Miss Evelyn had left a note. "Proud of you, girl. Now comes the hard part. Building the life you deserve." She was right. The revenge was satisfying, but it was just the beginning. The aftermath was more intense than I could have predicted. The story went national. "Teen Saves Brother's Life Exposes Family's Cruelty" ran as a headline in major papers. I was interviewed on morning shows, invited to speak at business conferences, featured in magazines as a symbol of resilience and entrepreneurship. Dust and Thorns exploded. We couldn't keep up with demand. I hired 20 more employees. We opened locations in 3 more cities. Celebrity clients reached out. My flowers appeared in music videos, high-profile weddings, presidential fundraisers. Within a year, the company was valued at $15 million. Tiffany's career never recovered. Luminaire fired her the day after the gala. Her social media, once her throne, became her prison as people dug up old posts, old videos, including the one of me kneeling among crushed flowers. She became a cautionary tale about privilege and cruelty. Mom and Daniel's reputation was destroyed. Daniel's business partners dropped him. Their country club membership was revoked. People they'd considered friends ghosted them completely. They tried to sue me for defamation, but their lawyer dropped them once he saw my evidence. Eventually, they sold the house and moved to another state, trying to start over where no one knew them. I felt nothing watching them fall. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just nothing. They'd become irrelevant to my life, to my future. They were just people I used to know, people who'd tried to break me and failed. I took Ethan traveling that next summer. We went to Europe, saw botanical gardens in Amsterdam and Paris and London. We hiked in Scotland. We ate gelato in Rome. We watched Ethan run through fields of flowers in Provence, laughing until he couldn't breathe, healthy and whole and happy. In Greece, standing on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, Ethan asked me the question I'd been waiting for. Charshar, do you think Mom and Dad loved us even a little? I thought about it carefully. I think they loved the idea of us. The version that was convenient that made them look good. But real love, no. Real love doesn't abandon you when things get hard. Real love doesn't crush you when you try to show it. Do you hate them? No, I said and realized it was true. I don't hate them. I just don't care about them anymore. They're not worth the energy hate requires. What about forgiveness? He was 9 years old and asking questions that most adults couldn't answer. Grace, I said, pointing to the wildflowers growing in the rocky cliffside. White petals with golden centers, exactly like the variety I'd named. You see those flowers? They're growing in impossible conditions, in rocks and wind and salt spray. They're thriving despite everything working against them. That's what Grace is, Ethan. Not forgetting, not excusing, but refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your whole life. He thought about that. Then he said, I think you're the strongest person I know. I hugged him tight. You're the reason I became strong. You gave me something worth fighting for. Back home, Michael and I grew closer. We took it slow, both of us damaged in our own ways, both of us learning what healthy love looked like. He became my partner in every sense in the business and in life. He understood the parts of me that were still healing, still learning to trust. Ms. Evelyn remained our anchor. She reduced her hours at the greenhouse, but never truly retired. She was there for holidays, for celebrations, for the quiet moments when I needed someone who'd known me at my lowest. Dust and thorns continued to grow, but I made sure to keep perspective. I hired therapists for the employees who needed them. I created scholarship programs for at-risk youth interested in horticulture. I made sure no one who worked for me ever felt disposable or unvalued. I never forgot where I came from. The basement apartment, the crushed flowers, the feeling of being worthless in your own home. Those memories became the foundation of everything I built. Years passed. Ethan grew into a remarkable young man, healthy and brilliant and kind. He did become interested in astronomy just like he'd dreamed. He studied astrophysics in college. He never forgot that I'd saved his life, but I never let him feel like he owed me anything. Michael and I got married in a greenhouse surrounded by wildflowers and the people who'd helped us survive. It was small and perfect, and nothing like the elaborate society weddings Tiffany used to plan. I expanded Dust and Thorns into educational programs, teaching disadvantaged kids about botany and business. I funded research into plant hybridization. I made sure the weeds had an advocate, someone who saw their potential instead of dismissing them. I never spoke to my family again. They tried reaching out occasionally. Usually when they needed something, I never responded. That chapter was closed. Sometimes people asked if I regretted the way I'd exposed them at the gala. If I thought I'd been too harsh, too public, too cruel. I always gave them the same answer. They tried to kill my brother. They tried to crush my spirit. They wanted me to believe I was worthless. What I did wasn't cruelty. It was justice. It was survival. It was refusing to let their version of me become the truth. Now I stand in my greenhouse, the flagship location that's become something of a legend in the botanical world. It's enormous, state-of-the-art, filled with thousands of plants in various stages of growth. Tourists come to visit. Schools bring students for field trips. Scientists collaborate with us on research. But I still keep a special section smaller and more personal just for wildflowers. Dandelions, clover, wild violets. The plants that people poison and curse and try to eliminate. I cultivate them with the same care I give my most exotic orchids. Because I learned something important in those years of surviving. Weeds don't die easy. They adapt. They persist. They survive conditions that would kill something more delicate. And when you stop trying to destroy them and start cultivating them instead, when you see their potential instead of their problems, they become magnificent. My mother tried to teach me that I was disposable, that I was trash, that I was a weed worthy only of being crushed underfoot. But she forgot something crucial about weeds. They survive. They spread. They take root in impossible places and refuse to be killed. They grow through concrete. They bloom in spite of everything. And sometimes when you try to crush them under your heel, they just learn to grow thorns. They learn to protect themselves. They learn that being called a weed isn't an insult, it's a revelation. Because weeds know something that roses never learn. Survival isn't about being beautiful from the start. It's about being unbreakable. It's about growing in the dark until you're strong enough for the light. It's about taking every attempt to destroy you and turning it into fertilizer for your growth. They called me a weed. They weren't wrong. But they forgot that weeds don't die easy. And sometimes when you give a weed enough time, enough space, enough determination, it doesn't just survive. It becomes a garden,